Peter Ursula Patterson had a pig named Porky. This pig named Porky loved pie. He loved pizza pie, pumpkin pie, pineapple pie, pizza pie, mince tarts, and Peter Ursula Patterson's pig Porky loved pie for breakfast, pie for lunch, pie in the afternoon, and pie before he went to bed. Peter Ursula Patterson's pig Porky ate so much pie that do you know what he did? He popped.
Welcome to I'd Buy That for $1, a podcast about inexpensive, common, and underappreciated records that are waiting to be rediscovered. I'm your host, Sean Hartman, and I'm happy to announce that I have re-entered the restaurant business.
I liked your last restaurant, so what do we got?
All right, get ready. I am opening a super fancy deli with a highly curated selection, and it's called Pecorino, Arugula, Capicola, and Jones Soda Limited.
Wow. Quite the model you got there.
It's going to be great. We're going to have so much goddamn arugula. Get ready.
Arugula.
Well, if you need any light reading for your new restaurant, Sean, I have authored a new book.
Ooh, perfect.
Let me tell you, it's called A Little Bit of Me, A Little Bit of You, the possibly true story of how Jeffrey Dahmer almost joined the new Monkees.
I think my guests are going to love that.
I have seen it stated as fact in what would purport to be reputable sources that Charles Manson did audition for the Monkees in 1965, and that is impossible because he was in prison in the state of Washington, I think, in the year 1965.
You know, I'm supposedly a reputable source, but I have stated that as fact to many people in the past, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
You're part of the problem.
I'm absolutely part of the problem with this one.
That's why I put possibly true in my book title.
That was wise of you.
Yeah.
After all that research, it was still possibly true.
Yeah. We live in a post-truth world, so it's, it's up there. As
yeah.
Yeah. You can't completely prove that it didn't happen, so therefore...
Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Who knows? Could be.
Well, I am co-host Peter Cook, and I am just a loudmouth Yankee. That's it.
Wow. No
Wow.
jobs, just a loudmouth Yankee.
Just a loudmouth Yankee.
Huh. Well, that's 3 Yankees. Do we have anyone else here?
Yeah, I'm here. And I'm Leaura Hoss, and I don't really have to question what I'm doing hanging around because I've spent the past 37 years thinking about the Monkees daily, nightly.
Oh, wow.
Perfect.
I could see you think about your titles for the podcast daily, nightly. Your intros.
It was an easy setup. What can I say?
Yeah, that's why you're back yet again, Leora. Thanks for coming back and joining Sean, Jeremy, and myself, co-host Peter Cook, on I'd Buy That for $1 for the 3rd time, I believe.
They say the 3rd time is what is it? What is the 3rd time?
The 3rd cut is the deepest.
That's what it is.
Oh, that's what I thought. Yeah.
Yep, we figured that one out.
No, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be back to talk about, who we're going to talk about tonight.
Yeah, why don't you tell the people who and what we're talking about if it isn't clear already?
Well, we're talking about one of my absolute favorite bands, the Monkees, and we are going to be speaking about their 4th album, which is titled Pisces, Aquarius, Capricorn, and Jones Limited.
Indeed, from November of 1967 on the, is it pronounced Coal Gems label.
That's how I pronounce it.
Yeah, I think that's it. Now, I don't know if we established yet that as Jeremy alluded to it when he said that we got 3 Yankees here. The last couple times you've dialed in to us, Leaura, you've been coming in from Boston, but where are you right now?
I am in beautiful, beautiful Great Britain. I'm in the UK at the moment, in the West Midlands, and I've been hanging out, making some connections here, and learning a little bit about what kind of records sell for $1 in the record bins here. So I can tell you right now, there's some great record shops here, and I've met some great people, and some folks may or may not be tuning into this podcast too. So I'm trying to spread the I'd buy that love here. That's really my mission, and why I'm over here now.
You were sent as our international ambassador.
Yes, happy to help. Stealthy. I'm very stealth as I say, I've got a good podcast for you with my hand on my hip.
And how fitting that on an episode about the Monkees, we have 3 people in the States and 1 in the UK.
Oh,
perfect. Oh, I didn't even think about that.
Well, where are we going to start? What song do we want to give people a taste of the Monkees to start off with here?
We're going to start off with a track titled "What Am I Doing Hanging Round?" This is a really, really interesting song to me. This is a Mike Nesmith vocal. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the Monkees albums, typically all 4 members, which also for those who aren't familiar, the Monkees members were Mickey Dolenz, Davy Jones, Mike Nesmith, and Peter Tork. And each one of them, had a presence on the album, and they each typically contributed vocals, although some, depending on the album, were more prominent and featured on more songs than others. But this particular song features the vocal stylings of Mike Nesmith and some interesting history behind it too. So I'm not sure if we want to get into the song first, or talk about the history a little bit.
Yeah, let's get into the song and then we'll talk about the history after they hear it.
Sounds good to me.
All right.
What are we doing hanging around? Let's do it.
Yeah, side B, track 2.
Just a loudmouth Yankee, I went down to Mexico. I didn't have much time to spend, about a week or so. There I lightly took advantage of a girl who loved me so. But I found myself thinking when the time had come to go, what am I doing hanging around? I should be on that train and gone. I should be riding on that train to San Antone. What am I doing hanging around? She took me to the garden just for a little walk. I didn't know much Spanish and there was no time for talk. Then she told me that she loved me not with words but with a kiss. And like a fool I kept on thinking of a train I could not miss. What am I doing hanging round? I should be on that train and gone. I should be riding on that train to San Antone. What am I doing hanging round? Well, it's been a year or so, and I want to go back again. And if I get the money, well, I'll ride the same old train.
Are you guys ready for confession time?
Yeah.
I love my little confessions into the microphone here. Prior to yesterday, I've never intentionally listened to the Monkees.
Like you never thought, I want to listen to the Monkees and actively listen to the Monkees.
Yeah, for all the reasons that are probably obvious, from a Jeremy mindset. You know, I'm not into the Beatles. In my brain, the Monkees are some weird TV made up version of the Beatles. And I was just like, I don't have any interest in even seeing what that's about. And this is my confessional.
Well, having with that being your background with the Monkees, how did you feel having willingly participated in listening to them with this album?
I felt a lot of tension. I'm not gonna lie. I was a little bit baffled because the music it's portraying in like psychedelia and folk, it like does it better than most things in that era. And that just like made this weird dissonance in my mind with the little shreds I know about the Monkees. It's like that thought plus the only other like bit of information I know about the Monkees comes from Sir Tom Sharpling of The Best Show.
Mm-hmm.
He's the host of a longtime radio show called The Best Show, where he tells the story about getting like really snubbed by Mickey Dolenz after just like pouring his heart out to him.
Yeah, I've heard him recount that a couple times.
Yeah, and that's all the info I had to go on. So I'm just really left in a state of confusion as to how to feel currently.
Mm-hmm. What are you doing hanging around, Jeremy?
I think you're probably far from alone on having some of that confusion with this group, though, because the impression that I get is outside of, the true monkey heads, that a lot of people don't understand how good this band actually was or how much depth there was to their songwriting. Just from an outsider perspective, people have probably heard, at least a few of the hits, Daydream Believer or something like that, and maybe just kind of passed them off as a fluffy, dated pop group, and yet there's so much more.
Yeah, and that right there was clearly a country rock song. Remember, we said this came out in 1967. That predates Graham Parsons releasing stuff commercially, who's often seen as the godfather, the pioneer of country rock.
Yeah, there was a few times on this record where I'm like, wow, this is 67. Like, they're kind of on the cutting edge here. This is not what I expected.
On multiple fronts, and we'll get to more of those. This is a good album to, I think for those who have that, what I would say is kind of the common universal perception of the Monkees. If you aren't someone who's, you're not ahead. It's common that they're just this fluffy manufactured Beatle-esque pop group, and they are a lot more than that.
And that's a reputation they've been fighting against since day one, from what I've read.
Yeah, absolutely.
Leaura, continue the fight.
I'm just over here reeling. Jeremy, it's like you're Lisa Simpson and I'm Ralph Wiggum. And I'm over here. You can pinpoint the exact moment my heart broke into when I heard you say that you have not listened to the Monkees. I have to agree with Peter and Sean. I think that as a whole, they were a very misunderstood group who, the whole concept of the Monkees began as a TV show, and really the musical component portion of it was a byproduct of that. And so, these guys were cast to act in a TV show while, enjoying some semblance of musicianship. And I say some semblance because some members were more skilled musically than others. And so, there was a lot of pressure. I hate using the term package because that's one of the terms that, the band fought against. But really, when they were packaging up this quote unquote product, which is another, thing I hate to say, but for lack of a better term, there was some talent there. Whether that talent was allocated and used in the right places is a whole other question. And so it's very, it's just a very, very interesting story where there's talent there. You see this group wanting to take creative freedom, wanting more artistic freedom, breaking away from those chains somewhat, but still being shackled and required to handle the business in certain ways because of contractual issues. And it was really an uphill battle for them, and I don't think that they got a lot of the musical recognition that they deserved, and especially with this album as well. I think, Peter, you said that, or Sean said, they were in the cusp and the forefront of a lot of things, a lot of different genres and musical breakthroughs that were perhaps taken to other levels by other artists after the release of this album, but they were there. And I think that one of the other items that you need to consider when thinking about the Monkees is, yes, there was talent there. Again, I repeat, it wasn't necessarily allocated in the right places for what the final product as we know as the Monkees would be. For instance, Mike Nesmith, even though he's a good guitarist, he was more skilled on the bass, and Peter was the bassist, and Davy Jones was actually the most skilled out of them to be the drummer. But due to his height, he didn't really fit the bill on the screen tests for positioning the band to perform on the show.
So they put Mickey on the kit.
That's right, and they put Mickey on the kit.
With
Mickey
with no drumming experience, right?
That's right. Like Mickey had to learn. And even, when he did learn and did perform on actual tracks, when the band got to a point where they could express that creative freedom and actually engage in the musicianship themselves, he did it for a bit, but then, he almost grew, from what I understand, he almost grew tired of it. And he's like, all right, yeah, I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore. And I remember reading a quote somewhere saying that, he wasn't necessarily the strongest link when, putting together some of the tracks for the albums as far as the drumming went. So, I mean, yes, there were challenges, but I think at the end of the day, what we need to remember is that, there was some talent there. And, these folks were partnered up and paired up with some of the best, which I know Peter, will get into as well. But, they were partnered with very skilled musicians, incredibly skilled songwriters.
Yeah.
And
that song we just listened to, What Am I Doing Hanging Round? It was sang by Mike Nesmith. He did not write the song. He's a very accomplished songwriter, and he'd even, written prior to this and prior to the Monkees, he had been in a band with a guy named Owens Boomer Castleman called the Survivors. And when Nesmith left to join the Monkees, he was replaced by a guy named Michael Martin Murphey, who Michael Martin Murphey and Owens Castleman were the songwriters for What Am I Doing Hanging Around. He had asked them to write a song for them, and that's what they came up with, and he loved the country edge to it.
Do you think Michael Martin Murphy's rap name would be Eminem?
That's a good point. Eminem.
Yeah, I think he and Nesmith went back a while, maybe School Days. Don't quote me on that. I think they may have gone back on School Days, but the track is really, to me, when I hear that, when I was younger and first discovering this record, I liked the song. Yeah, I knew it had a country flair to it, which wasn't necessarily my thing back then, but I knew that there was something unique and different about it. And to me, being a kid, 9-10 years old, hearing this song, I was like, wow, this actually makes country sound kind of cool to me if you put some rock to it. And I thought that was one of the unique factors, going back into my 9-year-old brain. I remember thinking that, and then this style obviously went on down the line and later in years, what is it? It's like a proto rock, country rock song.
Yeah.
Which I guess I would say in recent years has become in fashion.
Yeah, it was not in fashion when the Flying Burrito Brothers and Graham Parsons were originally around. They were not popular.
Definitely not.
It was probably the Eagles that solidified it as a commercially viable thing.
Yeah.
Realistically.
And Nez, as he was so thoughtfully called, that was his nickname, was Nez, Michael Nesmith's. He was originally a Texan.
Mhm.
And so, he was obviously heavily influenced by the type of music that he was surrounded by. But I think that he was a real advocate for trying to push this particular style to the surface. And not only was he a country guy, but he was interested in the blues and rock and kind of that rockabilly thing too. And I think that he was just very excited about pushing a boundary with this particular track and this song. And Michael Martin Murphey, I learned, he was a songwriter, as you mentioned, but he wrote a song that I've always in my adulthood found kind of interesting. He wrote a song. And Peter, I don't want to steal your thunder on this one if you were planning on commenting on this, but he wrote a song called Wildfire. And that is a song, he was kind of like a considered to be more of a country songwriter and wrote songs that had more of a country or a Western theme with horses and what have you. And I always found that song Wildfire to be interesting because, it's a song about a horse. But speaking of, genres that have recently or in more recent years come into fashion, everybody seems to really love or hate the yacht rock genre, if you will. And I feel like that song Wildfire is sometimes thrown into the whole yacht rock kind of genre, which is curious to me because, it's yacht rock. We want to hear about water, and this is about a horse. And I just picture the horse in some Midwestern plains somewhere. So the juxtaposition of that is interesting to me. But I thought that was a pretty cool fact about this song too, that he had that connection.
You got to ride your horse to get to the yacht, though. See, that's the connection.
Oh yeah, of course.
And if you,
that's how I get to my yacht.
If you have a fully legit yacht, you can, fit a horse on it and ride around on it.
Yeah, and I do know that song. That's a 70s classic that I don't know if you really hear many places anymore. I remember Gene Ween citing that as a song that he loved as a kid hearing on the radio growing up, Wildfire by Michael Martin Murphey. But going back to Michael Nesmith, I think it's maybe somewhat commonly known that his mother is the person who invented liquid paper, aka whiteout.
Yes, that's correct. That is correct. And I believe he's admitted that in interviews in the past. Yes.
And it seems to me that he inherited ingenuity and innovation from her. Not only was he a country rock pioneer, but he also was kind of a music video pioneer in that he had made a music video for his song Rio in the mid 1970s. He went on to this whole country rock career after the Monkees. He had the first national band and all kinds of stuff. And that video was popular, and it led him to consider TV programming that consisted entirely of music videos. And he came up with this concept called Pop Clips. It was a very early Nickelodeon show that was one of the first cable television shows to show music videos. And it's considered, it was like a forerunner to MTV. And he also won the first Grammy for a music video. He also produced some movies, including Repo Man.
Yes.
The cult classic that we've probably referenced a few times on the podcast, and Tapeheads as well, which was also an 80s cult classic.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you brought that up.
Yeah, you have to. It's Mike Nesmith's all over the place.
Yeah, he was a very smart man, and one of the things that I really appreciated about him, I mean, he was active on his Instagram account actually through the end, and I was a follower of his. He sadly passed on December 10th of 2021. One of the things that I found really interesting about him is he was one of those people. It kind of reminds me of the vibe that Bowie had, where he was always interested in the next big thing and the potential of the next big thing and how it could impact the future and technology and what have you. And he tried to stay hip on music as well. I say hip, I sound like an old lady, but one of the things that I remember in recent years, he was a big vaporwave fan, and he would post vaporwave videos and songs to check out. on his Instagram, which I thought that was pretty cool.
Was it?
You know, and I think he may have he may have smoked pot here and there, and I just have this vision of Nez, hanging out, smoking some pot, listening to some vaporwave, and sounds not bad.
Yeah.
That's impressive. I feel too old for vaporwave. I've tried a few times and I'm like, I just don't get it. I'm an old man.
You haven't lived until you've accidentally put on Lamal's Never-Ending Story on the wrong speed.
Huh.
That's a trip. That's a vaporwave right there.
Well, we've talked about the fact that Michael Nesmith was a songwriter. He around this time wrote the song Different Drum, which was a hit for the Stone Ponies, featuring a young Linda Ronstadt that launched her career. So not only was he making country rock music in the Monkees, but he was helping out others who were early to that hybrid genre. But he was a great songwriter all around, and he wrote the next song that I think we wanted to feature, Daily Nightly. It's written by Michael Nesmith, but lead vocals by Mickey Dolenz, and another instrument in the mix played by Mickey Dolenz that we'll talk about when we come back. Let's do a little bit of that. Daily Nightly, Side B, Track 4.
Oh my gosh, so trippy. What'd you guys think of that? Daily Nightly. This is, as you mentioned, Peter, this is a song that was penned by Michael Nesmith. This is a really, this is what we were talking about during our last segment, where this is a band that was on the cusp of things to come. You may have heard that this song incorporates an instrument that I know you on the show are all fond of, the Moog, something that has been widely discussed before on I'd Buy That for $1. But Mickey Dolenz had taken a particular interest in the Moog, and rumor has it that he was one of the first 20 people to own Moog synthesizer. And what's really great about this track is that, the Monkees had partnered with Paul Beaver to program the Moog, both on this song and on another Moog track that appears on here called Star Collector. But Mickey Dolenz actually played the Moog and the Moog parts on this song. This is a song that they're trying to make it relevant to the times. It's trippy. It's out there. There's supposedly a meaning to it. It's a commentary on the Sunset Strip curfew riots. So, there was a cultural shift happening, and the Monkees were based in Los Angeles, really, although they did a lot of vocal recording in New York, but they were primarily based in LA. And a lot of the fellow artists who they were adjacent to, these were Canyon people, and they were friendly with a lot of these guys who were, out there making this change. And so it was just, it was an experiment. I find this to be a very experimental, trippy song. I feel like I'm rambling, kind of like how I feel when I listen to this song. It just kind of rambles on. Peter, help me out.
Yeah. And it seems that there is debate as to if this was like the first popular recording to feature the Moog or not, but it's definitely very early on.
Yeah, it's absolutely early on.
I think we referenced this song specifically once or twice in the past about, Mickey getting his hands on one of the first Moogs and all that. Yeah,
when we did our Beaver and Krause episode.
Yeah.
Right. I think he might have seen their demonstration at the Monterey Pop Festival in the summer of 1967.
And
that was how he got turned on to the Moog, and here it is. I have to wonder what Monkees fans thought when hearing this, when buying this record in late 1967 when it was released. I have to wonder, their core audience was teenage girls at that point in time. And, when they had tried to branch out and do cool experimental things before, it hadn't really always worked in their favor. The previous album, Headquarters, they actually did more of the writing and playing on that than I think they do on this album. But they had also secured Jimi Hendrix as their opener on their tour in mid 1967, and I think that lasted for about 7 shows because Hendrix comes out. They had also seen him at the Monterey Pop Festival. That was his introduction to wider American audiences, because although Jimi Hendrix is American, he had established himself in the UK with Chaz Chandler from the Animals had kind of hooked him up and gotten the Jimi Hendrix Experience together over there. So that was the big American debut of the Jimi Hendrix Experience, was at the Monterey Pop Festival. The Monkees see that. Whoa, mind-blowing. They were looking for the cutting-edge stuff. That's what turned them on. And especially, I'm sure they were always eager to show that they weren't just a fluffy pop band. So here they have Hendrix go out and open for them, and all the audience is just yelling, "We want Davey!" They are not into this guy making this wall of feedback and noise, going into Purple Haze, and so it's they were always trying. Of course, the movie that they put out, I believe, the year after this, The Head, is one of the strangest mainstream films ever released.
Yeah, there's a contrarian thing going on. That was definitely the aspect of it that was making me like this more and more. Like you said, I can't imagine what the audience of this was thinking listening to this. Like, some of the lyrical content is pretty, heady, and
this right here is like a socio-political thing.
Yeah, there's some legit politics going in there, not just winks to the hippies, well thought out politics. And I was really surprised by that. And I just read the tiniest bit on how they were basically hired to just be actors, and they had other musicians initially playing the songs, and they were like, nah, we're actually gonna play the songs. So yeah, they have this contrarian nature that does appeal to me.
Yeah.
Something I wanted to touch on too, you mentioned how they had primarily studio musicians early on and then kind of took over later. I feel like this band in a lot of ways had this unfair reputation of being like, oh, well, they're not a real band because they didn't even play on any of their albums. It's like the thing you will hear people say and have always critiqued this band for. And yet they didn't really ever do that more than any other band of their time. People forget that at this point, if you were a pop band or basically any kind of a popular band in any genre at this point, you were primarily using studio musicians. But there's always just been like these groups that get singled out. People either feel like they're punching down, like maybe on the Monkees, or punching up at like the Beatles or something, talking about how Bernard Purdie played more drums than Ringo Starr did in the Beatles. And you hear like stories like this, but it was just how the industry worked, you know?
It must have been very challenging for them, because the whole concept of the TV show in general was inspired by the Beatles, Hard Day's Night and Help, and that sort of energy, which combined these acting vignettes with these super hyper bursts of musical vignettes. And so, they were kind of, just coming on the heels of the Beatles and the concept of this program. And then, they put out this album where they're trying to continue to assert their power, right? Because they were going in that direction on their previous album, Headquarters, and here they are with seemingly more artistic control on Pisces. And they released this, but there was Sgt. Pepper's. So, they're incorporating all these interesting styles and dynamics on this record, but then, the focus all becomes on Sgt. Pepper's anyway. And it seems to be like, it's okay if the Beatles do it, but if the Monkees do it, is this just a watered down, commercialized version of their statement on what's going on culturally around them too?
Now, was it this one or Headquarters that came out like a week before Sgt. Pepper's and was like remained at the number 2 spot for a long time after that?
Headquarters would have been released around the time of Sgt. Pepper's.
Right.
Yeah, this album was after Sargent. I think Sargent was May of '67, and this is November. So, who knows how long this was in production for, or what have you. But sad trombone for the Monkees on that.
Yeah, and I was reading too that like there was not a lot of expectation on them being a real band or songwriters. And while the TV show was happening, they were spending like 12 hours a day working on it and 7 days a week, oftentimes, and they started writing their own songs just like while the sets were being changed over. They had instruments there and just decided, instead of sitting back on this gig that they had that was making them tons of money, they're like, no, we want to improve our songcraft and like work on this band at the same time.
Yeah, I think the instruments were there that they were using on set, and they were just like, okay, let's plug these in and give them a whirl. And there's probably a lot of energy when you're awake for that long anyway and flitting about.
Yeah.
You just kind of go with that, right? So
do something constructive.
Yeah, exactly. Keep it going.
Well, speaking of keeping it going, how about we get into the next selection? What was that going to be, Leaura?
We're going to follow this up with a lovely little ditty called "The Doors into Summer."
This is my favorite one.
So
Is it?
Yeah, I've been liking to identify my favorite song on the album since we cover them lately. It's
the official Jeremy selection, side A, track 3.
The Door into Summer.
Let's do it.
With his fool's gold stacked up all around him, from a killing in the market on the war. The children left King Midas there as they found him in his counting house where nothing counts but more. And he thought he heard the echoes of a penny whistle band and the laughter from a distant caravan, and the brightly painted line of circus wagons in the sand, fading through the door into summer. With his travel logs of maybe next year places, as a trade-in for a name upon the door, buy back with his tears when he finds out there's been no one keeping score. And he thought he heard the echoes of a penny whistle band and the laughter from a distant caravan, and the brightly painted line of circus wagons in the sand fading through the door into summer. Yes, he thought he heard the echoes of a penny whistle band and the laughter from a distant caravan, and the brightly painted line of circus wagons in the sand fading through the door into summer.
Beautiful harmonizing from Michael Nesmith and Mickey Dolenz there, and someone else was in the mix with them. Does anyone know what well-known musician was singing with them on that track?
I saw a list of some like heavy hitters that were working with him around this time. I don't know which one it was.
I'm going to take a guess. Was it Nilsson?
Ding! Yeah, Harry Nilsson.
All right.
He actually wrote one of the songs on this album as well, Cuddly Toy. He was brought in by the producer, Chip Douglas, and he was just getting started in the music industry at this point. Harry Nilsson became close, lifelong friends with Mickey Dolenz.
Imagine that.
That song was actually credited to Chip Douglas and Bill Martin. They're credited as the songwriters. I guess Chip Douglas claims I think it's Chip Douglas that claims he had no part in it, but he had been recruited as producer by Michael Nesmith, who had seen him working with the Turtles. And the story went that, Michael Nesmith was like, "Hey, we'd love for you to come produce the Monkees." And Chip Douglas was like, "I've never produced anything in my life." And he was like, "Oh, you'll be fine." It's kind of like that story of Marty Ballin from Jefferson Airplane seeing Skip Spence in a club and going up to him and saying, "Hey, you're my drummer." And Skip Spence was like, "I'm a guitarist." And he's like, "No, you're my drummer. Come and play with us. You'll be fine." So apparently sometimes other musicians just can look at someone and know what they would be good at, even if they haven't exercised that skill previously. And it seems to have worked really well. I think the production on this is fantastic. Chip Douglas also plays bass throughout much of this album. And the Monkees on Headquarters, as we previously mentioned, their previous album, had really made a point to play the instruments to prove that they could do it. But because of how busy they were with the television show at this point, they kind of scaled back to, I think, work on more of the innovation on the record and were less concerned with proving that they could play their instruments. They'd already done that. So there are session players in here. Most of the drums are by a guy named Fast Eddie Ho, and he played drums on several well-known rock songs and albums, by Donovan, the Monkees. He had performed with the Mamas and the Papas at the Monterey Pop Festival in 1967. He participated in the highly acclaimed Super Session with Mike Bloomfield, Al Cooper, and Stephen Stills, that collaboration album that maybe one day we'll cover that one. I think that's still a relatively cheap album. But strangely enough, it seems that by the early 70s, Fast Eddie Ho just fell out of the music industry and remained out of the public eye until his death in 2015, and I couldn't really figure out exactly why that happened. But Mickey Dolenz does play drums on a couple cuts. One of them is the aforementioned Cuddly Toy that was
Jeremy's least favorite song.
Funny enough, the one penned by Harry Nilsson.
Oh, weird.
Yeah. And on The Door into Summer, the song we just listened to, that was Mickey Dolenz and Eddie Ho trading off on the drums.
Yeah, I think they do. I think that there may have been some taping up of Mickey's drums.
Yeah. The banjo that we heard on What Am I Doing Hanging Around was played by a guy named Doug Dillard. Are any of us familiar with that name?
He's a like country bluegrass guy, right? He's the guy who had the Dillards.
Yeah, exactly. And he had was it Dillard and Clark with Gene Clark? That's where I knew his name from mainly.
Nice.
So yeah, big time name, big time player. Yeah, like you said, country bluegrass. So yeah, they had some people augmenting their sound on this album, and they didn't write too many of the songs, but it still feels very much like they're in creative control and doing a lot of forward thinking.
Yeah, I'll say regarding this song, all these years, hearing it, I always thought, oh, it's sailing through the door into summer. It's like this nice, easy, breezy, beautiful song. Kind of reminds me of, again, that Canyon vibe where a lot of their peers and contemporaries were, they were all spending time together. But I did look into the derivation of this song title, and it's actually, I was very interested to find out that it came from a Robert Heinlein book called The Door into Summer, which is a sci-fi book all about time travel. So when commenting on the song, Bill Martin said, yeah, this is a song about time travel. And I just thought that was interesting. So I'll probably check out that book, which is apparently a hyper realistic, very science-oriented science fiction type of book, like real factual kind of stuff is what Robert Heinlein was into. But I also found it interesting that in the recording studio, and this may or may not be true, but I've seen photos of Mike Nesmith in, I call it a loo now, or the toilet, but in the men's bathroom recording. I think they were trying to get the right vocal. Whether or not that is the case for this particular track or not, still maybe up for debate. But regardless, a photo of Mike Nesmith in a men's urinal stall does exist with a microphone and a music stand.
Well, Sean, I'm going to turn our attention to you and ask if you came up with some similar recommended albums.
I did. Real quick, though, before I get into that, I just want to mention that the guy who did the cover design on this record, Bernard Yezin, was actually working for Motown around the same time and did a bunch of famous Motown album covers like Mary Wells, Temptations, Supremes. And then the same year, he also did the artwork for Brenton Wood's Oogum Boogum, which is cool.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah. And also Del Shannon's The Further Adventures of Charles Westover in 1968.
That's a classic.
Yeah. All great artwork, too. Very talented guy. So, recommended similar albums. We mentioned the Turtles. Definitely put the Turtles' Happy Together from 1967 on there. I think that's a great comparison. Another underappreciated pop band from this time.
Yeah.
And then, we talked about the early combining of country and rock and psychedelic music. And the obvious comparison there for me is the Byrds, Notorious Byrd Brothers from 1968. One of the records you can find for a little bit cheaper from the Byrds. Sweethearts of the Rodeo is another great country rock example from them, but is usually a little more expensive. And then finally, an album that we featured early on in the show, The Beach Boys' Today from 1965. We talked about how that was a transition from their more straightforward pop into their more produced and psychedelic and experimental music. So I feel like kind of a comparison to this. The Monkees are reaching out into new territory and going beyond their simple pop sound from earlier.
Through the door of summer.
Exactly.
Very cool.
Well, I feel like we just scratched the surface on the Monkees, but we've kind of come to the end of the road here.
Well, I think that for our listeners, if you went into this with a preconceived notion that, not to
Peter's motioning towards me.
Not to put you on the spot, Jeremy, but if you went into this with a preconceived notion like Jeremy had of the Monkees just being this fluffy Beatles ripoff, hopefully the samples of this record that we've given you have changed your mind a little bit. It's definitely worth exploring more of their catalog. And, I think that there's a lot more music obsessed people nowadays who know just how good the Monkees are than say 40, 50 years ago. But you can still find these relatively cheap.
Mm-hmm.
They're priceless to me.
Well, Leaura, thank you so much for dialing in from across the ocean and talking some Monkees with us. Glad to have you back on.
Oh, thank you so much. It was my pleasure. And honestly, I couldn't have said it any better. There is a lot to cover with the Monkees, and this is barely the surface. So the story continues. I encourage you all to kind of seek out and research more, or learn about them, because there are a lot of great songs. There's an incredible catalog of release songs from back in the day and from the vaults. They've been rediscovering and releasing. They were just so prolific. They recorded so much that, in more recent years, there have been undiscovered songs that they've been releasing and putting out there. And I think that there's a lot to compare from back then to what is happening now in the music scene as well. So I think they were definitely underrated and, near and dear to my heart, obviously.
Yeah, that record that they put out, it was really only about 6 or 7 years ago when both Peter Tork and Michael Nesmith were still alive. Davy Jones passed away about 10 years ago. But that Good Times, that was a great record.
I did not want to go there because I was a Monkees purist, but I ended up going there. I have to admit, it's a phenomenal record. And I think the songwriters, I think there was somebody from Weezer.
Yeah.
And the guy, forgive me, his name eludes me, but the gentleman who's no longer with us as well from Fountains of Wayne had a heavy hand in that as well somewhere. And
Adam Schlesinger.
I can't pronounce it now. Schlesinger.
I think I butchered it too.
Pork Shosh and Apple Shosh. They really did a phenomenal job of recreating that essence and that vibe of songs that I imagine would have been written for the Monkees back in the 60s and giving them just enough of a modern twist to make that sound recognizable and present day as well. So I really wanted to really despise that album, but I love it.
It's wonderful. All right, well, I think we've done as much as we can here, unless anyone has any final things they want to get in before we go out on our final song.
Let's hear that song.
Leaura, tell us what the final song is going to be.
Well, it is a Pleasant Valley Sunday indeed. We're going to go out on Pleasant Valley Sunday, little ditty composed by a couple of songwriters from a building you may or may not have heard of, listeners, called the Brill Building. And it was Carole King and Jerry Goffin. And they wrote this song, Pleasant Valley Sunday, which was actually, I believe, the only charting song or charting single from this album. And I always pictured this being a song about some valley in California, but in reality, it was written, according to Carole King, it was written about her experience moving to I think, West Orange in Jersey. So a little different content than what I expected, but the sentiment is the same nonetheless.
Yeah, this is one of their better known songs, and I think it should clue people in to the fact that the Monkees are worth checking out. You hear this one on the radio, it's like there's something here. This is a legit band.
100%.
All right. Well, thank you so much for listening to I'd Buy That for $1. Check out all the Monkee stuff. My name is Peter Cook.
My name is Jeremy Radio Ruggles.
Oh, nice callback to Leaura's last episode.
And I'm Sean Hartman.
And I'm Leaura Hoss. And it's a Pleasant Valley Sunday.
There we go.
Group down the street is trying hard to learn their song. Serenade the weekend squire who just came out to mow his lawn. Another Pleasant Valley Sunday. Charcoal burning everywhere. Rows of houses that are all the same. She's proud today because her roses are in bloom. And Mr. Green, he's so serene, he's got a your comfort goes. They only know my soul and make it hard for me to see. I thought so seems